Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson met with reporters today for his first press conference since taking office. He met with us in the federal courthouse in downtown Milwaukee. A lot of what he had to talk about focused on the federal deficit.
Again, thanks everybody for coming here. I want to welcome you to the federal court building here where one of our offices is. And basically what we're doing today is this is the formal opening of our state offices. Of course, we've been open since January 5th when I took the oath, but particularly up in Oshkosh where we had to do some building out, we had to get the sawdust out of the corners, so this is kind of a good time to just, again, formally open up the offices. Certainly from my standpoint, I realize that a United States Senator for Wisconsin has two primary responsibilities. The first responsibility really is in Washington, D.C., and that is dealing with the federal issues. And from my standpoint, those of you who followed the campaign understand that I ran because I think we're bankrupting this nation. So my efforts have really been focused on what can we do to reduce the size, the scope, and the cost of the federal government, and what can we do to make it more effective and more efficient. I mean, this year we will be running a deficit that's estimated to be almost $1.65 trillion, and we simply can't afford to be ineffective and inefficient. So that's my responsibility in Washington, D.C. Here in the state office, that's my other responsibility, and that really is then within the state, working with the citizens of Wisconsin, the constituents here, to help them navigate that federal government. If they have issues, and certainly we've already opened up, I think, in excess of 350 cases where we're helping folks in Wisconsin with issues like veterans issues, Social Security, Medicare issues, immigration issues. And I'd like to take the opportunity here to introduce my state director, Lieutenant Colonel retired Tony Blando. He's an excellent example of a servant leader, previously heading the ROTC in University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, and then he was the president of the Catholic school system in Oshkosh. So I'm very pleased that Tony accepted my offer to be my state director. And Tony has been given the assignment of filling out our state staff, looking for just exceptional people to do that constituent service, and I think Tony's done an excellent job. The type of casework we're doing, just one example, I think is a good example, and we had a daughter call up. Her father had cancer and she could not get a certain type of drug through the FDA. So our office was able to contact the FDA and obtain that drug for her, and not only for her, but it ended up getting that drug available for other people here in Wisconsin for their loved ones that have the same cancer. So that's just one example of things that we try and do to help the citizens of Wisconsin, I say, work with federal bureaucracy. One thing I would like to do, I'd like to give a big shout out and a thank you to both Senator Cole and former Senator Feingold. Both Senator Feingold and Senator Cole have been very helpful. Their staffs have been very helpful. We took over Senator Feingold's office here in the federal courthouse, which actually I think was Senator Caston's old office. So that was the most efficient way of doing that. And we also offered to any of Senator Feingold's staff that wanted to apply for a position, we'd be happy to take a look at that. Because again, our focus is on helping the citizens of Wisconsin. And we actually had one individual apply and we hired him. Manny Vasquez is now handling our immigration issues for our office, so we were very pleased with that. And of course, Senator Cole's state director and regional directors have been very helpful. Tony's called up a number of times to get help and advice. So we're trying to coordinate our state offices with not only Senator Cole's now, but also the congressional delegation as well, in terms of where we locate, where we have some regional directors, and we have one located in just people. Don't have an office set up, but people that live in the Wausau area, the Eau Claire area, and Madison, and then those folks can travel from their house to also kind of work on the casework. So again, that kind of describes what our state operation is here. Our office hours are standard business hours, 8 to 5, and one thing we're going to be doing on Saturdays, we're doing it the next 2 Saturdays. We're going to hold office hours from 9 till noon in the Milwaukee library, or county library, right? And then next Saturday in the city building, the City of Milwaukee building, also from 9 to noon. And we've got handouts just if you want to publish that, that'd be helpful. Just again, so the people that are working, find it difficult to get here between 8 and 5 can contact our state office on Saturday. And of course, you can always call anytime, day or night, and leave a message, and we'll get back in touch with you as well. So with that, happy to answer any questions you have.
So what were your first impressions when you first got to Washington as a newly minted senator?
It's a behemoth. One of the stories I've described, other people have written about it, but I'd never been to D.C. prior to the campaign. I went a couple times during the campaign, but I'd never had a chance to actually walk the mall. And I did that the day before orientation started. So this is before I was sworn in. And you kind of walking down the mall and you're looking at all these huge buildings. And I look over and, I mean, there's a really big building and it's the EPA, and you go, oh man, you know, it's like abandon all hope. I mean, the federal government is a huge enterprise. I mean, this year we'll spend $3.7 trillion. Let me put that in context, because we've switched from billions to trillions, and now 1, 2, 3 trillion doesn't seem that much. $3.7 trillion is $3,700 billion. That's the size of the federal government. It's about 25% of our gross domestic product. Other than World War II, that's a record high. And I guess that would be my, my input on that is that it's simply too big. It's too large, it's too effective, it's gobbling up too much of the private economy, and that, to me, is the root cause of what's ailing our economy, preventing job creation.
Senator Harry Reid has said he wants to hold a vote in the Senate on Paul Ryan's budget. What have your constituents been saying about that to you?
Well, I think, first of all, I'm heartened by the, I think, generally good reaction the Paul Ryan budget has gotten. I think Americans do recognize, certainly on a macro basis, that the level of spending, the size of government is simply not sustainable. And just like a family that gets in trouble with debt, credit cards, I mean, they realize they need to provide some self-discipline. So frequently they'll cut up those credit cards, or they'll certainly, the bank won't loan them any more money. So the federal government needs to do the same thing, and I think the American people recognize that and look at the Ryan budget as the beginning of that spending restraint. And let's face it, a couple weeks ago, the federal government almost shut down because we were arguing over a couple of $billion. But let me reiterate, our federal deficit this year will be $1.65 trillion, $1,650 billion. So we're arguing over a couple billion. Our problem is measured in the trillions. So again, I think the American people do have a sense. They may not know the exact numbers. They may not understand really how urgent the situation is, but they realize we have to address it. And again, I'm encouraged by the relatively positive reaction that the Ryan budget has gotten.
Ryan has said that he wants to do away with corporate welfare as well. Are you on board with him in saying you want to get rid of subsidies for oil companies?
And I think one of the positive outcomes of the whole budget debate is, I think across the board in Washington, D.C., people are talking about fundamental tax reform. And that's really what we're talking about when you start eliminating subsidies. Eliminating subsidies so you can bring down the top marginal rate to make us more competitive globally. Now, I said throughout the campaign, it's not that we have a choice whether we're going to compete globally. We have to compete globally. So if we're going to compete globally, we need to benchmark our tax rates. We need to benchmark our regulatory environment against other countries where that global capital will flow. So certainly, I'm a small to medium-sized business. I never trotted off to Washington looking for some special tax deal. And so I don't like special tax treatment for different businesses, certainly not large corporations. So I'm happy to take a look at overall structural tax reform. And right now, our tax code is 70,000 pages. I've seen estimates in terms of the cost of compliance in the hundreds of billions of dollars, $200 billion to over $400 billion. That's to raise $2,200 billion in revenue. I mean, that's an absurd level of complexity. So I'm absolutely on board. We need structural tax reform in this country to make us more competitive.
When you see this fight over $2 billion, as you said, in this last budget battle, how much hope do you have that you're going to get the kind of reform and cuts that you're talking about a month down the road, 2 months down the road, even 2 years down the
Yeah,
road?
well, that's not a very hopeful sign, is it? I think we need to be realistic. Fiscal conservatives, I would say argue Republicans, only control 1/3 of the legislative branch. And I'm including the president there. And we've got the House in Republican hands, we've got the Senate in the Democrats' hands, and we of course have the White House as a Democrat. And I think my biggest disappointment is that certainly President Obama is not showing any leadership whatsoever in terms of this budget crisis. I mean, he put forward a budget for the next 10 years that would almost double the national debt, which right now is approaching $15 trillion. According to his budget, he would add another $13 trillion. And spending would go, over 10 years, spending would go from about $3.7 trillion to about $5.7 trillion under the president's budget. Now, Paul Ryan's budget goes from about 3.7 to 4.7. So even under Ryan, we're still increasing spending. We're just increasing it at a decreasing rate.
Do you see something different than that? Is that?
Well, again, I support the courage that Paul Ryan has shown in terms of actually bringing out a solution, a serious proposal in terms of how we're going to start addressing this situation. But even the Paul Ryan budget, I mean,
That's not, doesn't go far enough for you?
well, I mean, certainly what I want to see first is I want to see those hard spending caps. And that's why I co-sponsored Senator Bob Corker's CAP Act, which would limit over time, you put yourself on a glide path, to limit federal spending to, Bob Corker said it at 20.6%. That's higher than I'd like to see it, but it's a start. Then I'd also like to see a constitutional limitation on spending. All the Republicans in the Senate co-sponsored a balanced budget amendment. I would also like to see maybe a little more simplified version, attacking what I consider the root cause of the problem, the size of government. I'd like to see a constitutional amendment simply limiting spending to a certain percent of GDP like the Corker bill does. So that we would have a statutory limitation in place, and then we could work toward getting it ratified by the states, a constitutional limitation on spending. So I'd like to see that in place first before we start passing budgets that, let's face it, the next Congress can do away with.
But what you're talking about, a constitutional limit, you will have to pass a budget before you ever get a constitutional limit. It would take longer to do the constitutional
Oh,
limit
sure.
than it would
But
be to pass
we
a
can
budget.
certainly pass a statutory cap.
I see.
And I'd like to see that. We're also going to be talking about votes on the debt ceiling as well.
So the statutory, or the cap on spending, you'd like to see that first?
I'd like to see that first before, and again, I have no idea how the Ryan budget is going to be presented in the Senate. So I don't want to start talking about hypotheticals in terms of how I'm going to vote for something that I don't even know that I'm going to see it in that same form.
Mm-hmm.
Senator, you mentioned the debt ceiling. Mr. Gaynor talked about it being catastrophic, undermined the dollar, and he said it raised borrowing costs. Where are you on those issues? Do you agree with him on those assessments?
Run that one by me again.
Mr. Gaynor talked about
Oh, Geithner, okay.
debt. Excuse me, I've been saying, I beg your pardon. Mr.
Okay.
Geithner, him too. He's been talking about raising borrowing, it would be devastating the United States economy. Do you agree with much of what he's saying or any of what he's saying?
I mean, what we're trying to avoid is a debt crisis. And a debt crisis is when people that are loaning you money either stop or demand a much higher interest rate. I mean, for every 1% increase in interest rates, federal spending would increase about $150 billion. Greece hit their debt ceiling when their borrowing in relation to GDP is about 127%. America is approaching 100% of our debt versus GDP. Now Greece, when they hit their debt limit, their total debt was about $420 billion, about 3% of what the U.S.'s debt is. So the European Union could actually backstop Greece and prevent the full catastrophe. If the U.S. hits that debt ceiling, there's nobody going to be able to backstop us. So no, we have to take the situation very seriously. But again, the way I would approach the problem is certainly a two-step process. Establish those hard spending caps. Put the straitjacket on Congress. Force Congress and the administration to start prioritizing spending. And personally, I think that would provide a credible spending plan that would then bring back confidence, remove some of the uncertainty of this economy, which is holding our economy back. And that's, first of all, it's a very important point to make. The number one solution for what ails our economy is economic growth. The policies that we enact have got to all be targeted toward encouraging economic growth so that we get our economy going again and start creating jobs.
Gas prices over $4 a gallon right now in Wisconsin. Are we at the point where we need to start treating gasoline like we do electrical power and have it regulated?
Well, gasoline's an oil-based product, and that's a global commodity. I don't see how you regulate it. I truthfully don't. I think the price of gas is related to this monetizing of the debt. We're just printing money now to pay for our debt. We see it in the price of gold, up over $1,500 an ounce, and the price of silver, I think it's over $50 an ounce, up from about $16 just a few months ago. We see it in the price of food, which is one of the things that's really spurring some of this unrest around the world. And we're seeing the price of oil and then the price of gas. I mean, other commodities as well. I mean, my business, my old business, which I'm not involved in anymore, is a plastics business. And just talking to the managers there, our resin price has gone up over 25% in just the last few months. That is going to start hitting our economy. You'll notice the first quarter we reported 1.5% annualized inflation rate. That still seems pretty low. But they exclude gasoline, they exclude food. And I don't think those are necessarily temporary increases in food and gasoline. If you factor those in, we're looking at about a 3.8% inflation rate. Alarm bells should be going off in the Fed that this monetary easing, is not going to end up well. And we better start addressing what's going to happen in terms of inflation sooner rather than later.
Are you thinking about any kind of market control, some of the speculation that's going on Wall Street with oil futures?
I mean, that's a free market. I don't see how you limit that. Okay? The best way long-term to handle rising gas prices is, first of all, be concerned about the value of the dollar. We should look for a strong dollar. Okay, that's extremely harmful. The other thing is long-term. Years ago, decades ago, we should have been fully utilizing what natural resources we have in this country. We should have energy policy that makes sense. I like the idea of exploiting our natural gas we have in this country. I think we should be safely and environmentally sensibly exploring more in the Gulf and utilizing the resource in the Gulf. I think we should drill in Anwar. The citizens of Alaska, it's their land. They want us to drill up there. I don't know why we limit that. All those things would help long-term control the price of oil and then help control the price of gasoline. Every time I go to the gas station, and see that it's gone up another dime, I mean, I cannot help but think of candidate Obama, his famous statement that because of his cap and trade proposal, electricity rates will necessarily skyrocket. That was his policy. I mean, the policy of this administration was for skyrocketing electricity rates, energy rates. I got a feeling that high gas prices are not that far from what he actually wants. Now, it's not particularly good politically. Maybe he's going to rethink that policy, but that was his stated policy as a candidate.
Where does political instability in the Middle East come in, though, and what should the U.S. role be in monitoring and or intervening?
Well, I'd like a more limited role, quite honestly. If you want to just quick talk about Libya, as a new senator, it was pretty disappointing that the administration, as soon as Libya started becoming a hotspot, as those rebels started surrounding Tripoli, the fact that the administration did not come to Congress and, first of all, inform us, give us the intelligence. What did they know about the rebels? Instead, they went to the UN, they went to the Arab League to try and get their approval. Never came to the Congress of the United States, which in the Constitution a commander-in-chief should do. Never came to the Congress for our approval. I just think that's wrong. I think, had the president been able to make a good case, he might have been able to get an authorization for the use of force. It's what he should have attempted. He didn't. That's incredibly disappointing. It's the wrong way of doing it. And now, what he ended up doing is just on his own, about a month, probably too late, he ended up enacting the fly zone, got ourselves involved in the Civil War. He picked a side. And even at this point in time, I don't know who the rebels are. I have no idea who we really backed here. But we've entered the side of a civil war with limited information. I think that's incredibly dangerous thing to do.
For the Waukesha Freeman, I'm Troy Locke. Be sure to watch part 2.